Hello student, welcome to the lecture on pricing and output determination, and after this lecture we will be able to learn the following objectives. Recognize the market and criteria for market classification. Describe various forms of market. Recognize the determination of market price. Recognize the determination of short-run price. Recognize the determination of long-run normal price. A simple definition of this concept by Papas and Hirsche: market structure refers to the number and size distribution of buyers and sellers in the market for a good or service. The market structure for a product not includes firms and individuals currently engaged in buying and selling, but also the potential entrants. The classification of markets is a key input in the process of index construction, as it drives the composition of the investment opportunity sets to be represented. The MSCI market classification framework consists of following three criteria: economic development, size and liquidity, as well as market accessibility. Determination of market price. Determination of the prices depend on internal and external factors. Pricing goals represent internal policy. Also, price policy should be aligned on several other factors. Demand. Demand is the key determinant for market-oriented company. Demand is the starting point for all activities. Simply, the average customer will be demanding different product quantities depending on price. Competition. Competition has a significant influence to price determination of market-oriented companies. Prices need to be adjusted in order to address the competition. Costs. While demand and competition are external factors, the costs are internal. The costs must be embedded in every stage of price determination process. Life cycle. Life cycle pricing approach analysis is the current phase of product life in market. Entering phase usually requires higher sales prices in order to pay back initial development costs. Also, customers are willing to pay more for a new product. Growth phase is bringing the market stabilization. Prices are more or less stable. Saturation phase leads to price decline due to competition entrance and loss of consumers' interest. Declining phase is the last part of product life cycle. Prices are still going down. Sales channel. Sales channels have the different shopping occasion. Consequently, the pricing is adjusted to sales channel. For example, the same products are cheaper in hypermarket than on petrol station. Government. Government is usually doing not interfere into price determination. Exceptionally, it may limit maximal prices for a certain products. Still, government is influencing pricing, since the taxes and custom duties are the part of the price. Monopoly and monopolistic competition. Monopoly competition. Monopoly market results in some deadweight loss. The demand curve represents the value that buyers place on each additional unit of a good or service. The marginal cost curve represents the additional cost of producing each unit of a good or service. The socially efficient quantity of output is found where the demand curve and the marginal cost curve intersect. That is where total surplus is maximized. Here is the graph which shows the monopoly competition. A monopoly market results in a lower quantity and higher price than a competitive market would have. Because the quantity is lower and the price is higher, there is deadweight loss. Total surplus is not at its maximum.
This is an introduction to the concept and the graphs associated with monopoly, a form of market structure where you have one seller no competition. When we talk about monopoly, think about it. Mono meaning one, poly, the action of sellers. Monopoly, one seller. Within the field of monopoly, we have a couple of variations that I want to try to explain in this little matrix. Okay? First of all, we look at monopolies and ask what kind of cost behaviors do they have? That is, as the company produces more output, do its average costs fall and then rise as we're used to? We call that a normal cost behavior. Does their average total cost curve have a shape like a U shape? Most monopolies will, but not all. Some monopolies will have decreasing cost, or what you may have learned is economies of scale. In that case, their average total cost curve falls over the entire range of production, meaning that as they produce more product, their cost per unit decreases. Continual economies of scale, lower cost per unit as you operate at a larger scale. So we have two cost behaviors in monopoly. Normal, U-shaped, or decreasing cost, falling line. Now a term applied to this in terms of monopoly, we call this a natural monopoly, indicating that the most natural thing would be to have one seller in this market who could produce all of the output and achieve a very low cost of production. And if you had 2 or 3 or 4 firms in this market, each one would have a smaller market share and their cost per unit would be relatively high, which would be both to their disadvantage and the disadvantage of the consumers. So it would be more natural to have only a single seller in the market. We see that frequently in the United States, for example, with electrical companies. When you go to buy your electricity from a company, you typically have only one choice. There's one company that provides electricity within your region. And that's because it has to operate, if it can operate at a large scale, producing a lot of electricity with a lot of customers, it can do so at cost savings for both the utility and for the consumers. So this would be a natural monopoly. This would be what we might call a normal cost behavior monopoly. Now the other variation in monopoly is that some monopolies are regulated by the government, whatever level of government, and some are left to operate on their own. For a reasonably small monopoly, they might well be left alone, and so that monopoly operates without any competition. In other cases, like our electric company, the government will regulate that monopoly because it's got sole rights to sell, and the government wants to prevent abuses by that monopoly in the way of charging very high prices by virtue of the fact that they can because they're the only seller. So we have normal and decreasing cost monopolies, and we have regulated and unregulated monopolies. Unregulated and regulated. So we have 4 variations in here we're going to talk about. The first one we'll talk about will be the normal monopoly and how it operates when it is regulated or when it is not. When we finish that, we'll talk about the decreasing cost or natural monopoly and how it operates if it is not regulated or if it is regulated. It makes a difference in the pricing structure the firm uses.
Monopolistic competition. The characteristics of monopolistic competition are significant numbers of sellers in a competitive market, differentiated products, advertising and promotion, relatively easy entry of new firms in the long run. Each firm faces a small market share, lacks the ability to collude, makes its decisions independent of what other firms do. Product differentiation. Product differentiation is the attempt to make their products different from other similar products by alternating minor attributes of the product. These type of products have a large number of close substitutes. How do you think firms communicate the differences in their products?
That may sound a bit like an oxymoron, but it's a very descriptive term for the market structure we want to talk about. Monopolistic competition. This is one step away from perfect competition. You remember perfect competition had 4 assumptions. Remember those? Many small buyers and sellers, a homogeneous product, easy entry and exit into and out of the market, and perfect information. We're going to change one of those assumptions strongly right now. And that will allow us to take that perfectly competitive model and make it a little more realistic with respect to the real world. Monopolistic competition. A lot of competition, but every seller trying to create in his own way his own monopoly, to be the only one who's got a particular product. So the assumption we're going to change here is, rather than homogeneous products, all of them identical to the consumer, we're going to call them or allow for product differentiation, so that each seller now can differentiate his product, make it different from his competitors in some way. He may make a smaller or a larger size, he may paint it a different color, he may give it a warranty, he may give it a fancy name, he may do more advertising for it and create a desire on people's parts to have only that brand. So now we have a lot more competition in the way of advertising and marketing, and in fact in the design and manufacture of the products. So this is probably the most realistic model we're going to use to represent reality. Every company trying to make themselves distinct, separate, and more desirable than their customers. Monopolistic competition. Now, from perfect competition, from here on out, the next three market structures, including this one, are forms of imperfect competition. If it's not perfect, it's imperfect, and if it's imperfect, we can identify that on the graph by seeing a negative slope demand curve for the firm. This is for a single company, and now we'll always see negatively sloped demand curves, not that perfectly elastic horizontal demand curve from perfect competition. And when we get a negative slope demand curve, it has a separate marginal revenue curve, which has twice the slope, and it's located inside or below the demand curve and extends down into negative numbers. Okay? We're using a straight line demand curve, a separate marginal revenue curve. If that's not comfortable to you, go back and review it. Taking these two as starting points, we say, well, what's going to go on in this company? Well, they have the same cost structures as the perfect competitor. They have an average total cost curve with its typical U shape. They have an average variable cost curve that I'm not going to use because that's not part of our discussion, but it is there. And then they have the marginal cost curve, which starts out with a little hook in it and goes through the lowest point on the average total cost curve. So here's our situation, and we want to follow the same steps we've been doing in the past. The first thing we're going to look for is point alpha. Alpha, the beginning of everything. Alpha is the point where marginal cost intersects or equals marginal revenue. On this graph, this is not marginal revenue, this is. So marginal revenue, marginal cost intersect right here. That's point alpha. Alpha tells us the quantity to produce. So this is the quantity, we'll call it Q1 and alpha 1. This is the quantity the firm wants to produce and sell. And so their next decision is to choose the price that will accomplish this goal, that will sell this many units. Remember, in perfect competition, they didn't choose the price. The price was determined by the market. Now, they're price makers. They determine what price works for them, and in order to sell this quantity, they read up to the price line, also known as the demand curve, and they read all the way up to that and say, aha, that's where I want to be on my demand curve to sell that many units, and the price that corresponds to that is price level 1. So here's this firm in its equilibrium, a monopolistic competitor, in the short run. And we'll move into the long run in a minute, but what's going on here? How's this company doing? And the answer is, at this quantity of output, now we do the profit thing, right? Total profit. We read up, and we say, there's the price. We also read up to the average total cost curve and say, oh, this is the average total cost for producing that many units. And so the difference between price and average total cost is either the profit or the loss. In this case, the price is high, it's above the average total cost, so this entire rectangle represents the profits of the company. So here we have the firm in short-term equilibrium earning an economic profit, price above average total cost. Very similar to what could have happened in perfect competition when the price was above the average total cost curve at whatever output they were operating at. What's going to happen next? It's very similar to perfect competition. Every company is making economic profits that will attract more competitors. This company will wake up tomorrow maybe, look outside and say, oh my goodness, there's a lot more competitors out there on the street. And so those competitors will be taking away some of their customers. And so this firm will have fewer customers. It will lose part of its market share. As its market share shrinks and has fewer buyers, a decrease in the number of buyers decreases the demand curve. At an extreme, suppose their demand curve shifted way over here, D2. And it has a marginal revenue curve, MR2. So this is their world the next day. How's it doing? Where's point alpha? That's where we start, right? Well, marginal cost, marginal revenue looks like an intersection over here. Read up to a price here and a quantity here, quantity 2, price 2. But then when we read up to average cost 2, the company is losing money to the extent of that pink rectangle. And so if they're losing money, what's going to happen? Just like in perfect competition, some of the companies are going to go out of business. The ones with the deeper pockets, more savings, are going to last a little longer. As the other competition disappears, demand will move back out, maybe even making them profitable again. And so in the short run, the demand curve is constantly fluctuating. You have profits sometimes, you have losses other times, just like perfect competition. So that's the short run equilibrium in monopolistic competition. You may be making a profit, you may be taking a loss. Let's look now what happens in the long run. Just a very brief step forward, but let me clean this graph up a minute. Okay, we've got the graph cleaned up a bit. Here's their average total cost curve. We said at times the demand curve is going to be up in here, allowing them room for some profit. At other times it's going to fall below average total cost, where they're going to take a loss. In the long run, though, what is going to happen? Much like perfect competition, in the long run, all the profits or losses are going to be eliminated, and the company is going to go to a break-even level of operation. But remember, the demand curve is not flat, so they won't be tangent to average total cost down here. But their new long-run demand curve will be tangent to the average total cost curve, somewhere along in here. That's supposed to be tangent. Let's call that D long run, where you have a point of tangency here. And that's where they'll be operating. And if we were to fill in the marginal revenue and marginal cost curves, this is their quantity, they would have, say, a marginal revenue curve here and a marginal cost curve here. This would be their alpha, if that's not too messy. But this point of tangency between the demand curve and the average total cost curve is their long-run position. And when there's tangent here, what? The price and the average total cost are the same. So the company is earning a normal profit, no economic profit. It's breaking even. So it can remain there in the long run. It's making enough accounting profit to stay in business until something else disturbs the market. Remember the 5 factors that shift demand or the 5 factors that shift supply. So here we are. This is the company, the monopolistic competitor, in long-run equilibrium. A point of tangency with the average total cost curve, but not the same point of tangency you would have seen in perfect competition.
Perfect competition. Firms in perfect competition are price takers. No influence over market price. Take the equilibrium market price as given. Characteristics: homogeneous product, large number of independent firms, each small relative to the total market, no barriers to entry or exit. Supply and demand determine market price. How perfect competition arises. Minimum efficient scale, small relative to demand for the good or service. Firm perceived to produce good or service that has no unique characteristic. Perfect competition. Key concepts: economic profit is equal to revenue minus by total cost. Total cost includes normal profit. Normal profit. Return entrepreneur can expect to receive on average in an alternative business. Understand distinction between total revenue and marginal revenue.
In perfect competition, 1, there are a large number of sellers. There are a large number of buyers too, but we won't be worrying about that just now. No individual is large enough to affect the market. 2, the product is homogeneous or identical or non-differentiated. For example, milk. When you go to buy 2% milk at the supermarket, what brand do you buy? If you're like me, you buy whatever's on sale. I have no brand loyalty whatsoever because milk is milk. 3. There's perfect information. It's actually not enough for products to be identical. Everyone has to know that the products are identical. Otherwise, we could be fooled by things like pretty packaging or celebrity endorsements. In a perfectly competitive industry, firm versus firm advertising is useless. All you'd be doing is driving up your own costs, and then customers would just buy from a cheaper competitor. However, you may see industry-wide advertising like the Got Milk campaign, pork, the other white meat, or beef, it's what's for dinner. These kind of campaigns raise demand for each firm's product across the industry. 4. Easy entry and exit. Because firms can enter and exit the industry at will, long-term profits will be effective, but we'll get to that in just a bit. For the individual firm owner, the combined effect of these characteristics is that he or she has no power to control price and will earn zero economic profit in the long run. Let me ask you this. If the individual firm cannot set the price, then where does the price come from? Think back to our market activity earlier in the semester. In a market with lots of buyers and sellers, the price is determined collectively by the market supply and market demand. This, then, is the prevailing price for each firm. What happens if the firm doesn't like this price? If it tries to charge more than P star, all of the customers will go someplace else, so the firm would be forced back down to P star. If it tries to charge less than P star, then all customers in the industry will come to this firm. Sounds good, right? Wrong. This firm cannot accommodate the entire industry demand. Costs would skyrocket. The firm would be forced back up to P star to get rid of some of the customers. All of this means that the firm is a price taker, forced to accept P star, the market-determined equilibrium price. Note that this also means, because the firm charges P star regardless of the quantity demanded, that P star represents the firm's demand as well. Remember that perfectly elastic demand curve from earlier this semester, where consumers are so hypersensitive to price that price is all that matters? Well, that's this market structure. Okay, so you're a producer in a perfectly competitive market, and you have no control over the price that you can charge. Is there anything you do have control over that you can make decisions about? A perfectly competitive firm may not be able to choose its price, but it can choose how much output to produce. The firm owner will choose the level of output that will maximize his or her profits. See episode 26b to see why. Marginal revenue equals marginal cost will always be the profit maximizing rule. So, you're a firm owner in a perfectly competitive industry. You can't choose the price that you charge, but you can select the amount of output that you produce. In order to maximize profit, you will always choose the level of output where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Take a look at the perfectly competitive firm and see where this occurs. I need to choose output such that marginal revenue equals marginal cost, but right now I don't see marginal revenue or marginal cost. Let's start with marginal revenue. Marginal revenue is the additional revenue that you earn when you sell an additional unit of output. For a perfectly competitive firm, since all units are sold for the same price, each unit sold always adds the same amount of revenue, P star. For example, if price is $5, then the total revenue for 0 units is $0, for 1 unit is $5, for 2 units is $10, and so on. Selling 1 more unit generates $5 additional of revenue each time. Therefore, marginal revenue is equal to the equilibrium price. Note that this is only true for perfect competition. What about marginal cost? Well, marginal cost is actually pretty easy. We constructed the cost curves, marginal cost included, before knowing anything about market structures. Those cost curves are the same regardless of the structure we're operating in. This means that the marginal cost for the perfectly competitive firm is just marginal cost. Remember that J-shaped Nike Swish thing? And now, all we need to do is select the level of output where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Now, because there are no average cost curves in this diagram yet, I can't actually show you how large or small the profits are, only that Q star will be the best level of output for this particular producer based on the profit maximizing rule. Let's look at just one example of how to find profit using this model, then we'll do more cases in class. What if my perfectly competitive producer is operating in an industry where price is greater than the cost per unit? I can already tell that this producer will be making profits since there's more coming in for each unit than there is being paid out in cost, but let's see what it looks like. Notice that I've positioned the average cost curves below the price line. Where is MR equals MC? This gives me Q star. At Q star, what is the total revenue coming in? Revenue is the price I can charge times the number of units that I sell. In this case, the green area. At Q star, what's the total cost of producing this output? It's the cost per unit, ATC, times the number of units that I sell, in this case, the red area. The amount of revenue, in green, that doesn't get chewed up by the costs, in red, is profit. In this case, I've indicated profit by the blue area. In the short run, this producer earns positive profits. Why do I say in the short run? Because those short-run profits attract the sharks. Other outside firms see the profits and enter the industry to set up shop. This causes industry supply to increase, driving the price downward. In the end, the entry only stops when there are no more profits to attract the sharks, until price is equal to average total cost and the firms just break even. In the long run, a perfectly competitive firm's profits are always equal to zero.
Short-run analysis of a perfectly competitive firm. A perfectly competitive firm produces the profit-maximizing quantity of output that equates marginal revenue and marginal cost. This production level can be identified using total revenue and cost, marginal revenue and cost, or profit. Because a perfectly competitive firm faces a perfectly elastic demand curve, it efficiently allocates resources by equating price and marginal cost. In addition, the marginal cost curve above the average variable cost curve is the perfectly competitive firm's short-run supply curve. Determining output. A perfectly competitive firm is presumed to produce the quantity of output that maximizes economic profit, the difference between total revenue and total cost. Total curves. The short-run production decision for a perfectly competitive firm can be graphically illustrated using total revenue and total cost curves, such as those displayed in the exhibit to the right. These total curves represent the total revenue and cost of zucchini production by Phil the zucchini grower. Production alternatives. A perfectly competitive firm faces three short-run production alternatives based on a comparison of price, average total cost, and average variable cost.
And we know this is the firm. And how do we know this is a perfectly competitive firm? It's got a flat demand curve, perfectly elastic demand curve. It's also got its cost curves, average total cost, average variable cost, and marginal cost. And what's going on with this firm as you look at the graph right now? And again, what's the first thing you look for? You look for point alpha, right? This is marginal revenue, this is marginal cost, they intersect here. This is what I'm going to call alpha 1, the initial point alpha, which tells us quantity. And so the firm is producing quantity 1. And remember, this is every firm. They each have the same curves. How profitable is this company? Are they making a profit, an economic profit, or are they losing money? And the answer is that at this quantity, when we measure up, the price is higher than the average total cost, and they're making a profit. They're making an economic profit, a profit above a normal rate of return. They're doing very well. What's going to happen in this industry? And the answer is that when other folks look around and look at this industry and the way each firm is doing and how profitable they're doing, more companies are going to come into business because they see the opportunity for profits. And as more sellers enter the market, what's going to happen over here? There's going to be an increase in the number of sellers and an increase in supply. And as a result, let's say that the price is driven down from price 1 all the way to price 2. And so at price 2 over here, how's the company doing? And the price is way down here, demand curve 2. Demand is the same as marginal revenue. Here is our new alpha point, somewhere around in here, alpha 2. The company should produce Q2. And if they do that, how are they doing? Well, their price is below their average total cost, so they're losing money. Now, alpha, in this sense, when they're losing money, minimizes their losses. It keeps their losses as small as they can be, but they're still losses. And how long can the firm continue to function at this level? They're losing money. It's going to depend on basically how much money they've got in the bank to continue to fund themselves to keep operating. Eventually, though, if the average company looks like this, some of them and then more of them are going to go out of business. And as you have a reduction in the number of sellers in this industry, what happens over in the industry curves? And the answer is, well, when some sellers go out of business, then we're going to have a decrease in supply, let's say to S3, which is going to raise the market price to P3, which translates over here to P3, which means for the companies that stayed in business, they're now looking at this demand curve number 3. How's life? And the answer is, well, look for point alpha, right? Here's point alpha 3, right? Marginal revenue, marginal cost. Here's the best quantity to produce, Q3. And at that quantity, their price is higher than their average total cost, so they are making some economic profit. What do you suppose happens next? People look around and they see these companies making an over and above the normal rate of return, and some folks say, man, we ought to go back in that business. They're getting rich. And so what would happen next? You'll have an increase in the number of sellers, which will shift the supply curve to the right, which will drive down the market price to P4. So for the company, now their price has been driven down to price 4, and it's over here, demand curve number 4. And here's alpha 4. And here's the quantity they should produce, quantity 4. And how are they doing at that quantity? Well, we read up and we say, here's the price, but here's the average cost. They're losing money. The average company, all the companies are losing money. And the ones who don't have any money in the bank, they're going to go broke pretty quick. You're going to have a reduction in the number of sellers. The supply curve is going to shift back to the left. You see the process? It's very dynamic. For the industry, the supply curve is constantly increasing and decreasing, increasing and decreasing. And for the individual company, the price is constantly fluctuating. And some days you're above your average total cost curve and you're making money. And some days you're below your average total cost and you're making money. And maybe not on a day-to-day basis, but on a month-to-month, year-to-year basis. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. That's the dynamic nature of the beast. Let's ask if that's the way it's played in the short run.
Perfect competition, long-run production analysis. In the long run, a perfectly competitive firm adjusts plant size or the quantity of capital to maximize long-run profit. In addition, the entry and exit of firms into and out of a perfectly competitive market guarantees that each perfectly competitive firm earns nothing more or less than a normal profit. As a perfectly competitive industry reacts to changes in demand, it traces out positive, negative, or horizontal long-run supply curve due to increasing, decreasing, or constant cost. Perfect competition is a market structure characterized by a large number of small firms producing identical products with perfect resource mobility and perfect knowledge.
That's the first thing you look for. You look for point alpha, right? This is marginal revenue, this is marginal cost, they intersect here. This is what I'm going to call alpha 1, the initial point alpha, which tells us quantity. And so the firm is producing quantity 1. And remember, this is every firm. They each have the same curves. How profitable is this company? Are they making a profit, an economic profit, or are they losing money? And the answer is that at this quantity, when we measure up, the price is higher than the average total cost, and they're making a profit. They're making an economic profit, a profit above a normal rate of return. They're doing very well. What's going to happen in this industry? And the answer is that when other folks look around and look at this industry and the way each firm is doing and how profitable they're doing, more companies are going to come into business because they see the opportunity for profits. And as more sellers enter the market, what's going to happen over here? There's going to be an increase in the number of sellers and an increase in supply. And as a result, let's say that the price is driven down from price 1 all the way to price 2. And so at price 2 over here, how's the company doing? And the price is way down here, demand curve 2. Demand is the same as marginal revenue. Here's our new alpha point, somewhere around in here, alpha 2. The company should produce Q2. And if they do that, how are they doing? Well, their price is below their average total cost, so they're losing money. Now, alpha, in this sense, when they're losing money, minimizes their losses. It keeps their losses as small as they can be, but they're still losses. Now, how long can the firm continue to function at this level? They're losing money. It's going to depend on basically how much money they've got in the bank to continue to fund themselves to keep operating. Eventually, though, if the average company looks like this, some of them and then more of them are going to go out of business. And as you have a reduction in the number of sellers in this industry, what happens over in the industry curves? And the answer is, well, when some sellers go out of business, then we're going to have a decrease in supply, let's say to S3, which is going to raise the market price to P3, which translates over here to P3, which means for the companies that stayed in business, they're now looking at this demand curve number 3. How's life? And the answer is, well, look for point alpha, right? Here's point alpha 3, right? Marginal revenue, marginal cost. Here's the best quantity to produce, Q3. And at that quantity, their price is higher than their average total cost, so they are making some economic profit. What do you suppose happens next? People look around and they see these companies making an over and above the normal rate of return, and some folks say, man, we ought to go back in that business. They're getting rich. And so what would happen next? You'll have an increase in the number of sellers, which will shift the supply curve to the right, which will drive down the market price to P4. So for the company, now their price has been driven down to price 4, and it's over here, demand curve number 4. And here's alpha 4. And here's the quantity they should produce, quantity 4. And how are they doing at that quantity? Well, we read up and we say, here's the price, but here's the average cost. They're losing money. The average company, all the companies are losing money. And the ones who don't have any money in the bank, they're going to go broke pretty quick. You're going to have a reduction in the number of sellers. The supply curve is going to shift back to the left. You see the process? It's very dynamic. For the industry, the supply curve is constantly increasing and decreasing, increasing and decreasing. And for the individual company, the price is constantly fluctuating. And some days you're above your average total cost curve and you're making money. And some days you're below your average total cost and you're making money. And maybe not on a day-to-day basis, but on a month-to-month, year-to-year basis. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. That's the dynamic nature of the beast. Let's ask, if that's the way it's played in the short run, how does it stabilize out? Where does it move to in a long-run equilibrium? And I'm going to draw it very quickly. Eventually, wherever that average total cost curve was, remember the demand curve is moving up and down, Remember, the marginal cost curve is here. Eventually, in the long run, this point right here, the lowest point on the average total cost curve, where the marginal cost curve goes through it, the demand curve, we say long run, is going to become tangent to the average total cost curve. Tangent, just touching, right here. That makes this point alpha, long run. This makes this the right quantity. Let's see if we can find a little room for that. This would be our quantity in the long run. And at this level of output, how's the firm doing? Are they making a profit, taking a loss, or breaking even? And the answer is, at this point, the price they are charging exactly equals the average total cost, and so they are breaking even. And this becomes the long-run equilibrium for the firm in perfect competition. Again, this is a concept. This is a model. It's a little unrealistic. Do you think they're going to remain in long-run equilibrium very long? What could change that? Any of the 5 factors that shift the demand curve, taste and preferences, number of buyers, incomes, price of alternative goods, and any of the factors that shift the supply curve, number of sellers, sellers' expectations, cost of production, any change in the industry equilibrium is going to change this equilibrium. And if it results in a higher price, the company is going to make profit and attract more competition. If the change in the industry results in a lower equilibrium price, companies are going to start going out of business. But the dynamic nature of it is at least interesting, okay? We see this as sort of a reflection of what competition is like out there in the market. All right? If you understand this model, it makes the rest of the market structures we're going to look at, monopolistic competition, oligopoly, monopoly, makes those graphs very easy to understand. Make sure you understand this one very, very well. It will also help you, by the way, when you start looking at literature, news articles, what's going on in the world. It gives you a vocabulary and a sense of understanding to discuss, analyze, debate what's going on. Okay? Perfect competition. Short run, win, lose, draw. Very, very, very competitive. Long run, no profits, no losses. Okay, thanks.
Summary. Market is any area over which buyers and sellers are in close touch with one another, either directly or through dealers, that the price obtainable in one part of the market affects the prices paid in other parts. Price is a component of an exchange of transaction that takes place between two parties and refers to what must be given up by one party, that is buyer, in order to obtain something offered by another party, that is seller. Market structure refers to the number and size distribution of buyers and sellers in the market for a good or service. The classification of markets is a key input in the process of index construction, as it drives the composition of the investment opportunity sets to be represented. Oligopoly is a market structure in which a small number of firms account for the whole industry's output. The number of firms and product differentiation are extremely crucial in determining the nature of competition in a market. Demand is the key determinant for market-oriented company.